116th episode of Decoding Fox News, and I'm your host, Juliet Jeske. Each week, I watch and analyze a whole heck of a lot of Fox News and then break it down. I watch all the Fox News you'd never want to. This past week, it was 22 hours of Fox News. Yikes. I gotta stop doing that. But it was a big news week. It was a big news week because we found out that Trump was convicted on all 34 counts in his criminal trial. That happened. Yes, it did. And I haven't really slept much. I worked the entire weekend, no break. I had to in order to catch up. And then I noticed Aaron Rupar, who I am a big fan of, posted an interview of Trump on Fox and Friends Sunday. And so I said, you know what? I got to get that. So Sunday, I spent 4 hours capturing all 4 hours of Fox and Friends Sunday. And then what I did as a project is I went through and I cut out all the sections that were just the interview. They were interviewing him from his golf club in what Bedminster, in what looked like a study type area. And it was the three weekend hosts, which were Will Cain, Rachel Campos-Duffy, and Pete Hegseth. So they're interviewing him. And I noticed very quickly they were repeating clips. So I thought, let's just make this into one big clip, all just the interview from the 4 hours, because they kept saying like, hour 2, we're going to show you more from that interview. Hour 3, we're going to show you more from that interview. And they didn't. They kind of just kept recycling the same, I'd guess about 15 minutes. And they'd cut it up in like 10-minute sections and they'd move it around and then they'd show like little bumps from it. So they'll show like little 30-second clips. But they just kept repeating the same stuff over and over again. They were pulling all the tricks of how to hide when you're when you're sticking video clips together. Like they'd put another image on the screen so you couldn't tell it didn't match with the. They take part of a clip and they'd stick it on the front of the second half of a clip. All kinds of crazy stuff. And so it was confusing. You'd have to really pay attention to know what they were doing. You'd have to do basically what I did, go through it with like a fine-tooth comb, like a researcher. So this edit might not make a ton of sense audio, but I wanted to show you how much they repeated him. Again, this is supposedly a 90-minute interview. They had 4 hours worth of programming. They showed about 15 minutes worth of this. And it was clumsy. He looked a little nutty. It was not his greatest interview. They were not the greatest interviewees or interviewers, however you want to put that. So just picture this. I'm going to play the clip. And then I have since found the interview because Fox went ahead and put it on the Will Cain podcast because they really wanted people to see this. Sarcasm. Okay, here's the clip of this wacky interview.
Well, look, I'm fighting for the Constitution. I'm fighting for the same thing that you three. I watch you all the time, and same thing that you do. Look, I'm fighting for the Constitution. I'm fighting for the same thing that you three. I watch you all the time, and same thing that you do. And I got to know the real fighting generals. There's not woke in the military. There's woke at the top. They want there to be woke, but these guys aren't meant for. And I got to know the real fighting generals. There's not woke in the military. There's woke at the top. They want there to be woke, but these guys aren't meant for woke. We've never had that in this country. They do have it in other countries, in South American countries. You know a little bit about it, right? They do have it in other countries, in South American countries. You know a little bit about it, right? These are bad people. These people are sick. And they do things that are so destructive. I mean, look what they did from the day, because these are bad people. These people are sick. And they do things that are so destructive. I mean, look what they did from the day I got there, because these are bad people. These people are sick. And they do things that are so destructive. I mean, look what they did from the day I got there. These are bad people. These people are sick. And they do things that are so destructive. I mean, look what they did from the day I got there. If it weren't me, they'd be going after somebody else. And I know a lot of the competition, they wouldn't do so well. They wouldn't be doing so well right now. They'd be saying, "Mommy, take me home." Don't forget, if it weren't me, they'd be going after somebody else. And I know a lot of the competition, they wouldn't do so well. They wouldn't be doing so well right now. They'd be saying, "Mommy, take me home. I want to go home." Don't forget, if it weren't me, they'd be going after somebody else. And I know a lot of the competition, they wouldn't do so well. They wouldn't be doing so well right now. They'd be saying, "Mommy, take me." Don't forget, if it weren't me, they'd be going after somebody else. And I know a lot of the competition, they wouldn't they wouldn't do so well. They wouldn't be doing so well right now. They'd be saying, Mommy, take me home. I want to go home. These are bad people. I know everything they're doing. I know every move they make. I get it. But a lot of people don't. But these are bad people. I know everything they're doing. I know every move they make. I get it. But a lot of people don't.
I also thought it was interesting that the bad people, those clips kept getting repeated. Now, those were all part of a longer quote, basically. The one where he kept saying bad people, these people are sick, that was part of like maybe a 2-minute segment that just got repeated over and over and over. I just grabbed that beginning because that's the part that always stuck out to me. So I searched the transcript for that and found it 5 times in the total mega clip I'd created. So it was an odd interview. I just found the full interview tonight, right before I started recording, and technically it is from this week, not last week. So it will probably, I plan on breaking it down and looking at it with a fine-tooth comb as I do. There's also been 2 congressional hearings this week so far. And I like to break those down for the paid subscribers. And so I'll be doing that. And I'm planning on doing some type of Hunter Biden cheat sheet, as it were, now that he's back in the news and his legal problems are back in the news. Because I went through that exhaustively, because that used to be a major topic on Fox News. And it has since dropped off, basically because the impeachment inquiry went nowhere. They never really found any evidence against Joe Biden, and it's just been a colossal waste of time. But boy, do they know how to waste time, because, they were still going at Merrick Garland today. Oh my goodness. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. So the shows I covered last week were Fox and Friends, The Five, Hannity, Jesse Waters Primetime, Brett Baier, and the Ingram Angle on Thursday, because that was the day of the verdict. And then all 4 hours of Fox and Friends Sunday, which I didn't get to go through those until Monday, which is why this podcast is late. Oh my God, this news cycle is just, I don't even know what to do. I don't even know. I'm like hanging on for dear life. So back to the interview. This is a question that Will Cain asked Donald J. Trump. And the reason why I clipped this, and this is why I'm actually looking forward to going through the full hour, because I think I'm going to find more gems like this, is Will Cain thinks this is like a hard-hitting question. I'm sure he does. I'm sure he thinks he's like really changing the world with this question. He's asking things no one will ask. No one wants answered with this question. He's breaking barriers. He's destroying walls. He's knocking it all down. He's changing the world. I say this because the main criticism that you'll hear on Fox all the time is that the mainstream media, whatever the heck that is, because they are that, is too, biased towards President Biden. Well, this is how Fox interviews Donald J. Trump.
People ask you, why do you do this? How can you do this? I mean, not to mention the rally after rally, the energy. But maybe the question isn't how do you do this over and over, but how does your family do this?
That's a typical Trump favorite style of question, because basically what Will Cain is doing there is like, you are so amazing. No, really, you are so amazing. How do you do it? How do you, this megalomaniac, narcissist, sociopath who has no empathy for other human beings, how do you get up every day when the world is obsessed with you, which is exactly what you want because you're a narcissist, and you have to fight the good fight with your buckets of money that you can use to bully other people and intimidate them and all the fun stuff that you do? How do you do it? When you go to a rally where you have your sycophants who go to every single rally that you have all over the country because it's a cult, how do you do it? How do you remain happy when you're the center of everybody's attention, positive and negative? Okay, I added some subtext there, didn't I? I did, but this man drives me to distraction. Oh my goodness. I think it's fair to call that a fanboy question, right? Fanboy question. This next one was directed by Trump. This is a visual, so I have to explain what happens here. So again, he's got Will Cain, Rachel Campos-Duffy, and Pete Hegseth interviewing him. And they're all sitting there. Woo! And at this point, Trump makes a direct reference to Rachel Campos-Duffy, like looks right at her and uses like a hand gesture to indicate he's talking to her. Here we go.
Maybe they're doing me a big favor, who knows? But I'm not allowed to talk. I'm gagged. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's all coming out. It's weaponization, and it's a very dangerous thing. We've never had that in this country. They do have it in other countries, in South American countries. You know a little bit about it, right?
Well, that actually leads me to...
Okay, so that one is funny because if you know anything about Rachel Campos-Duffy's background, it's especially hilarious that he just assumes that she's some sort of expert on South America. Now, she might be. I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence that she is. Perhaps she's well read on South America and everything that's happening there. There's no evidence in this interview that she is. She is Latina, but here is her background. Her father's parents, so her grandparents on her father's side, immigrated from Mexico to the United States. Her father was born in the United States. Her father is from Spain. So her father was in the Air Force, was stationed in Spain, met a woman, fell in love, got married. They moved back to the U.S. So Rachel Campos-Duffy is half Mexican-American, half Spanish, and she grew up in Arizona. She sometimes implies or makes comments that make it seem that she's Cuban. And I've seen this multiple times. She's made comments about Cuba, like she's some sort of Cubans, and she'll like sort of kind of reference herself. No, she's not Cuban at all. She grew up in Arizona. Her father's Mexican, her mother's Spanish. So she does speak Spanish fluently. She is Latina. That's lovely. But she is not Cuban. She's not an expert on South America. And we all know what that is when a white person just assumes that a person of color just knows stuff because they're a person of color. So just way to go there, Donald J. Trump. It was subtle, but I caught it and I clipped it. Okay. Gotta love it. I wrote Rachel Campos-Duffy is from Arizona, not Argentina in the newsletter. So yes, the newsletter this week, not a ton of hyperlinks because there's really nothing to hyperlink. This is just aftermath of the verdict. And I want to address something really quickly because I got some weird energy this past week. I won't say what it was, but some people don't understand why I do both a newsletter and a podcast. And some people are very pro podcast or pro newsletter. I'll explain. Every single week, the newsletter outperforms the podcast every single week. It usually gets more likes than the podcast. It usually gets more reads than the listens or downloads of the podcast. A lot of people consume both, and that's wonderful. And it just boils down to some people would rather read than listen. Some people would rather listen than read. That's it. The tone of the newsletter is a little bit more serious, not as goofy as the podcast. It's also, I think, one reason why people prefer it. I don't care. Whatever way you would like to consume Decoding Fox News, I'm here for you. So just wanted to address that because I think some people don't quite understand that. And you can find the newsletter at my Substack for Decoding Fox News. I think what it boils down to is just easy to read on your phone rather than, downloading a podcast and listening to that. I just think for some people, when they're traveling, they're commuting on a train or whatever, they can just whip out the newsletter and read it in their leisure. It's pretty quick. So yeah, I get new followers all the time and I kind of forget that I should sometimes explain this stuff over again. So there I am explaining it. So next up, this clip is sort of the clip of the week. I'm putting it here though because I wanted to include that Trump monologue at the top. Monologue, it basically was a monologue. Trump interview at the top, but basically was a monologue now, wasn't it? So Eric Shawn, who's my new favorite correspondent at Fox News. Eric Shawn is part of the legitimate news team at Fox. And yes, it does exist. They actually have reporters all over the country. And they do strive to actually have like legitimate, we're the real deal news. They're very proud of this, even though after the Dominion lawsuit, the settlement where they paid out $787.5 million to Dominion Voting Systems for lying, they laid off their entire investigative news team, which is horrible, but there we are. But Eric Shawn is part of this legitimate news team, and they had sent him to cover the Trump trial. And so he was standing in front of the court building in Manhattan, which is in downtown, day after day after day, and he looks like you're right out of central casting for like a news reporter, the trench coat, the, sensible outfit, nothing crazy, not too fancy, very like, gumshoe reporter, like the real deal with his glasses, very serious man. And this was him on Tuesday, and Steve Doocy kind of volleys this towards him. You'll see what I'm talking about when I play the clip. Steve Doocy kind of assists on this one.
Hey, Eric, before you go, I think it was on Truth Social in the last 24 hours, the former president seems upset that his lawyer, when it comes to closing arguments, his lawyer has to go first and then the prosecution goes second. Doesn't the state always go last? That's what he's upset about.
Yeah, that's New York law. Different states are different. He gave that posting, and that's not the case. Under the law, the defense goes first, then the prosecution goes. He's also claiming that the election expert Brad Smith was not allowed to testify. That is not true. Smith's testimony was restricted by the judge, but it was Trump's defense attorneys. Trump's own side decided not to call Smith, the president claiming something that is, again, false.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So what makes that clip so amazing for so many reasons is that Eric Shawn just blatantly, just straightforward, he's like, yeah, that's not true. This is New York law. This is how we do it in New York. He can complain all he wants. That's not true. And then that's a false statement. Now, the reason why he doesn't use the term lie, everyone gets on me for this. I get complaints constantly like, why don't you say lie? Is it's very difficult to prove that somebody is lying in a court of law. And so it's just opening yourself up to legal liability, meaning it's opening yourself up to getting sued. And why do that when you don't have to? So you'll say, made a false statement, misspoke, said something incorrect. That you can't get sued for. Because if I say he said that incorrectly, or what he said is not true, that is, yeah, I can back that up in court. To say something is a lie, I have to know inside his brain that he knows what he's saying is not true. And that's very difficult to prove. The way you can prove somebody's lying is if they said, I went outdoors and it was raining and I got wet yesterday. And here's a picture of me getting wet. And then on Tuesday they say, I never said that. I never went outside in the rain on Monday and I don't have a picture of me getting wet. And then you play the clip and you say, ha. Then that's kind of a provable lie. But something like, I'm angry about this case because they didn't let this and they didn't let that. No, I mean, he could argue that he really thought what he was saying was true. And you'd have to prove intent. You'd have to prove a bunch of stuff, and it's not worth it. So that's why he doesn't say lie. Just wanted to preface that because people always come at me because I don't use the term lie very often. I sometimes do. And I always use really weak verbs. You'll notice this among journalists. It appears, it seems, it might be, it probably is. The reason why we're saying that again is legal liability. Unless we know something 100%, we don't say it. That's supposed to be what journalists do. And also for our audience, unless we know something 100%, we shouldn't say it. So that's just how it goes. Like if I don't know something 100%, I don't have proof of it, I don't know definitively, yes, that's true, I'm not going to say it's true. Because that would be a disservice to my audience as well. Because I'm here to inform. I'm here to inform. I'm also here to be kind of silly and make fun of Fox, which I do in the podcast. But my real goal is to inform. So next up, we have Jesse Waters, who cannot let the jury alone. He was harassing jury members without using their legal names, but definitely trying to intimidate the jury as the jury was being sat, as they were being selected. And now that the case is over, he still can't stop. This is on the day before the verdict, actually, he made this comment, because I think they were worried they were going to get a guilty verdict, so they were sort of hedging their bets. And Dana Perino starts this, because this is from the 5 again, and then Jesse Waters adds his comment.
And as a lawyer, and you wonder if he or she had a similar reaction to what the judge is saying and what we've heard from our legal analysts all day.
I worry about the two lawyers because they're both at Manhattan corporate law firms, and if they are in a jury that votes to not convict Donald Trump, they have to go and see their boss, and they have to go see their colleagues. And there's a lot of social pressure. There's a lot of peer pressure there, Dana, to not bring back to your liberal law firm in Manhattan a conviction.
So there's so much to unpack with that clip. So much. Okay. Yes, there were 2 lawyers who sat on the jury. You have to be upfront about your profession during jury selection. When I did it myself, the judge seemed genuinely interested in my media project, which was funny. She did. She was like, really? That sounds fascinating. And I was like, well, the reason why it'd be difficult for me to sit for jury is that I am the CEO / main reporter / researcher / sound engineer / editor / caretaker to 2 cats / help me. Anyway, yeah, a lot of work to do. Decoding Fox News as one person. Anyway, but yes, you give out your occupation, and the defense and the prosecution kind of take that into consideration when they select the jury, because they don't want people who they think are going to be too dominant on a jury. I know that's a common problem that most lawyers would say, that they don't want somebody who's going to try to lead the jury. So it's unusual that lawyers get on juries, but they do. And in New York, there's a lot of lawyers. What's funny about that clip, though, is he says liberal law firm. What liberal law? What are you talking about? The finance industry in New York is enormous. It's a huge part of the industries here. It's a major contributor to tax revenue in the country. So like Wall Street, securities firms, all hedge funds, all those fun places. Those people all use lawyers. And then there's corporations who use lawyers. So this idea that lawyers are liberal because they're in Manhattan is like kind of hilarious, because plenty of them aren't liberal. Yeah, I'm sure you could find some liberal firms who are for like human rights or housing or all kinds of stuff that they specialize in, immigration. But a lot of lawyers in New York are just, they take cases based on what their specialty is, what they've honed their craft in, and it's not anything that you'd call liberal. So that's funny. Then he also sort of implies that they'd have to go back to their firms as, we acquitted Trump. No, they're anonymous. So their firms can't say this lawyer was on the Trump jury. They're not allowed to. I can't imagine a law firm would be able to do that and not get in huge trouble for that. Because somebody on a jury, they're not supposed to brag about, like, I convicted that person. You're performing a civic duty. It's anonymous. Nobody's supposed to be bragging about it. Nobody's supposed to be like, no law firm certainly would be bragging about it. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. And this idea that there's this peer pressure, because again, anonymous. So yeah, thanks, Jesse Waters, for being an idiot, as usual. So before I go into the next clip, I want to give a shout out to my sponsor. And who would that sponsor be but the listeners to this podcast and the readers of my newsletter, which I mentioned earlier. If you'd like to become a paid subscriber to Decoding Fox News, you can go to my Substack at Decoding Fox News or my Patreon for Decoding Fox News. And all paid subscribers and paid supporters get exclusive content, and that varies from week to week, month to month, what I can offer. This week, I'm definitely going to go through those House hearings and make my kind of fun edits of those, which I do for everybody. So if you cannot afford to become a paid subscriber or paid supporter, the best thing you can do is share the podcast, share the newsletter, tell your friends, give me a great review. A couple of people this week, this is because it was a big week. It was the highest numbers ever on that podcast. I just think this is funny. I'm not scolding anybody, trust me. But this has happened before. People will forward the newsletter or the podcast to somebody, and they include me in it. So I get an email, and I'm always very confused by this. I'm always like, am I supposed to answer this? And it happened this week a couple times. And sorry if I put anything awkward in a thread there. I was just confused why I was getting the email. So just be a little careful that you're not also CCing me when you forward something. It's a little funny. It's a little awkward. But thank you for sharing the newsletter. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's just funny. So next up, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, but William Burgum over at PBS. The reason why I included this is I went, oh my goodness. I have been confused about this case for weeks because I watch copious amounts of Fox News. And William Burgum over at PBS broke it down in about 30 seconds. The whole clip is about a minute, but he broke down the whole case in about 30 seconds. So if you are as confused as I am about this crazy case, let him explain it for you, and then I'll explain why I go over PBS after I play this.
In some ways, because the jury this morning heard two different things at their request. They wanted to hear jury instructions and they wanted to hear a certain type of testimony reread to them. And both of those, now looking back in hindsight, give some clues as to what they were thinking, because both of those things that they were read today go right to the heart of this case. The first one was jury instructions, which detailed whether a defendant can be found guilty if they orchestrated acts that other people did, criminal acts that other people did. And Donald Trump, clearly, they seem to believe, is guilty of that. The testimony that they asked to re-listen to today centered on this famous 2015 Trump Tower meeting that many people have pointed to as the sort of original moment when the entire scheme that eventually undid the president in this case was concocted. This is where David Pecker of the National Enquirer, Michael Cohen, his lawyer, and Donald Trump met and created this scheme to become the eyes and ears of the Trump campaign, to look for any negative stories, to pay people to stay quiet, and that's what eventually led to today's guilty verdict. So again,
I mean, that's it. He summed it up in 30 seconds. It's like, amazing. Amazing. And that's why I wanted to share that clip with this audience, because I have not done a good job explaining this case. I openly admit this, because I did not understand this case. Why? Because I had to watch a lot of Fox News. I had to watch a lot of Fox News, and they just confused the heck out of me, because that's their job. Their job is to confuse their viewers. Their job is to confuse their audience about what is really going on. And that brings me to, I should include more of this periodically, because I get new followers all the time, and I forget that. And I don't try to explain the project Decoding Fox News. But right now I'm going to explain the project Decoding Fox News a little bit, because I got some drama this weekend. I won't get into it. But so when I started this project, I decided I would compare Fox News to a legitimate nonpartisan news source. I chose the PBS NewsHour because it's the opposite of Fox in many ways. Now, I'm approaching this like a researcher, like a scientist, and I say, I'm going to look at propaganda, but I need a control to my propaganda. A control being something that's straight, something that's not outrageous, that's not outside of the box, and that would be PBS. So I sometimes get questions about why I also include data from PBS NewsHour every week when this project is dedicated to breaking down disinformation, misinformation, and misleading stories on Fox. The NewsHour is part of the nonprofit Corporation for Public Broadcasting that gets a small portion of its funding from public sources. It also receives revenue from private foundations, corporate grants, member station dues, and pledges from individual viewers. The NewsHour is not sensational, partisan, or driven by ratings. The program offers comprehensive coverage on national and international stories. The producers also go out of their way to include both sides to most issues. They sometimes will include opposing voices in the same segment, or they will give them equal time in separate segments about the same topic. Comparing Fox News to PBS has given me incredible insight to the depth of the propaganda on Fox. I've used examples from PBS to directly compare segments from Fox News. So this is important. I think it's also important for my listeners and readers to see the just profound differences. I've had readers tell me that they've taken the list of PBS stories that Fox News doesn't cover, and they've shown them to their Fox News loving relatives as like, look at what you're missing out on. I've had compliments saying, I'm so thankful that you do that because I get to see the context of what we're missing on Fox. I don't think anybody else does it that covers Fox. I really don't. The graphs, another one. That's part of this whole concept of Decoding Fox News. Right off the bat, I thought for sure that people wouldn't like the graphs, and I was ready to cut them. Probably 3 months into my project, I was like, I'm probably going to cut them. And then people start giving me feedback that they loved them. And they've also been published independently. I've had people take my graphs, screenshot them, stick them on Twitter. I'm not kidding. The word ones always get published a lot. I've had people write story. I know somebody wrote a story inspired by my graph. I'm not kidding. So yes, it seems nerdy and weird, but this project is nerdy and weird. So I'm not trying to be the Daily Show here. I am a nerd. I am a journalist. So moving on from there, I just wanted to get that out of the way. I also want to mention very briefly that I'm a passionate believer in data. I think data can move mountains because it's much harder to argue. Like, people like to argue on opinion, the whole opinion versus fact, which a lot of people have a hard time differentiating between the difference between opinion, I like vanilla ice cream, to fact, vanilla ice cream is the top selling flavor in the world, which is true. So you say, well, how can that be? How can vanilla be the top seller? I hate vanilla, so people can't always understand the difference between opinion and fact. And the beauty of data is it's very difficult to say, for instance, that Fox News is fair and balanced, or is just another voice in the wilderness of news, and it's just as legitimate as another news source when I say, you know what? Last week, everybody else covered the Israel-Hamas war, and on Fox, the number one story was Hunter Biden. Do you see what I'm saying? When I can show that they've said Hunter Biden 200 times in the transcripts, and nobody else even mentioned him that week, that's powerful. You cannot refute that. You can't say, well, come on. But with opinions, you can. If I just give my opinion about everything, it's not as strong. But if I can back it up with data, it's much stronger. So that's my 2 cents. I'm going on a little bit of a rant here, but I'm very passionate about this. I studied data journalism in grad school, not video. Everybody thinks I was a video person. Nope. I already knew how to edit video when I entered grad school. So moving on, just a weird fun fact. I'm so tired right now. I am delirious. I need to sleep, but I'm going to keep going. So this one, you knew this was going to happen. This is titled, "It's a Revolution. Be prepared to fight." Yikes. Here we go, guys. Buckle up. So this starts on Friday, the day after the guilty verdict. This one surprised me because North Dakota governor Doug Burgum, who's about as interesting as a shoehorn. It's a very specific reference, but it's true. He's about as interesting as a shoehorn, and he's known for his eyebrows more than anything else. Very thick, luscious eyebrows. Very thick, luscious. You could put stuff in them. You could braid them. He was on Fox and Friends, and he was very calm. His demeanor is very flat, yet he's saying incredibly alarming things. Here's the clip.
Alvin Bragg yesterday said, "Hey, I did my job." And we said, "I'm doing my job." He was really talking, and I did my job. He's talking to Joe Biden and all the people that were driving this lawfare. But now we get to do our job, the American people. And the reaction I've seen, the phones, the text, the calls last night, people are rising up. Because the thing is, the prosecution of Donald Trump began in November of 2016, when he won that election, when he wasn't supposed to win the election. Whether it's Russian interference, whether it's Steele dossier, whether it's impeachment, the American people go, this has been going on. This is old news. This thing yesterday is not new news. It's old news. So this verdict changes nothing for them. But then the same group is like, we've got him now. It's like the American people are like, no, they're going to rise up and fight.
So obviously the term rise up and fight could mean something benign, like we're just going to rise up and vote. We're going to rise up and get organized. But the wrong person could interpret those words in the worst possible way, especially when you use terms like fight. And they've, of course, criticized Democrats for doing this exact same thing. Maxine Waters is one example. They constantly bring up old clips of hers where she's basically talking about, just getting out there and organizing and working hard. And they're like, she's calling for a revolution. And I'm like, no, she's not. Now, Trump, however, because of January 6th, we've had an example of a revolution, so you can just sit down. Okay, so Burgum implied in his statement, you kind of had to see it, but he made like air quotes when he said he wasn't supposed to win the election. So he's sort of implying that it may have been illegitimate or that it was supposed to be rigged for Hillary or something. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but that was problematic. And then using the phrase rise up and fight, obviously problematic when you're speaking to a group of people that stormed the Capitol, smashed in windows, and threatened to hang the vice president. Just saying. Now, later on the 5, Jesse Waters goes with this as well, and he uses the term revolution.
70-something. He's a former president. He's got no track record. These are nonviolent misdemeanors, Frankenstein into a felony. If this judge tries this, there's going to be a revolution in this country. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, again, revolution can be meant as something much less scary, depending on the context of the term revolution. You could say it's a color revolution. It's a revolution of happiness. There's all kinds of terms that you could use that are not scary. But when you're talking about political revolutions, problematic. Very, very problematic. But Greg Gutfeld just goes right off a cliff with this one. And the things he says are just highly troubling.
But if
So everything's going to be looked at with a large measure of suspicion. We're going to presume everything is rigged. Sorry, but we have 4 years of watching this happen. So if Trump, who's 77, suddenly drops dead from a cardiac arrest on the golf course, and it's real, do you think anybody's going to believe that after everything we've been through? They better hope that Trump stays healthy and is well protected. Because if anything happens to him, you're just going to assume the Democrats are behind it. And if Trump is way ahead and still loses, oh boy.
I just want to point out that Hillary Clinton was way ahead in 2016, and oh boy. Okay. What was good about that? He's basically saying Trump wins or we riot. I mean, basically, Trump wins or we riot. He's basically saying that. I guess the only scenario he's not saying that is if the polls are close and Trump doesn't win, possibly. But he doesn't say that. He says if Trump was way ahead, which they claim he's way ahead now, and he kind of isn't. Depends on which poll you look at. They're kind of all over the place. A lot of the national polls still have them neck and neck. And so I don't know. So I was hoping I would have time for my bonus clip, and I do have my bonus clip. This has nothing to do with the Trump guilty verdict, but I wanted to include it, so I'm including it now. This is Jesse Waters thinking he's an economist.
You know, it's not just thinking about we're bringing in illegal aliens. We're bringing in 10 million new customers, Judge. So when you have a customer, what do? They buy things. They consume. All right? So you're bringing in 10 million consumers. What does that do? That drives up inflation. And because they're low-skilled workers, it drives down wages because you're paying them very, very small amounts of money. So he's opened the border and driven up inflation, down wages, and then transferred all of the wealth to the hotel CEOs.
That's right.
It's insane.
Yes.
It's a massive wealth redistribution scheme.
Okay, I believe that was from Wednesday. A lot to unpack with that one as well. So the only argument that he could make is that when the migrants first come to certain cities where they are put up in hotels and the hotels get the rooms at full price, you could say they are affecting the price of hotel rooms in that city. They're causing inflation to hotel rooms in that city. I'll give him that. You could argue that. But they're not there for that long of a period of time. They're usually there for a short period of time, and then they have to go back out and figure it out on their own. They have to find their own housing. So I would say that it has an effect. I don't know how great of an effect. Certainly nationally for inflation, I'd say no effect. Also, you cannot say that 10 million people, which I don't know if that number is true, but you're going to pull that from thin air. 10 million people entering the country are causing inflation. I would say they are not, because they're living on subsistence wages, which you also said in the same statement. So people who are just barely making it, even if there's 10 million of them, they're not going to put that much pressure on demand because they're living hand to mouth. They're not consuming that much stuff. And they're certainly not buying anything like high end. They're buying like basics. So I'm not really buying that. And it's bizarre that you would blame poor people for inflation. That's the lowest people on the economic rung is who you are blaming on inflation. That makes no sense whatsoever. The corporations who are exploiting the fact that prices rose are to blame, 100%. Not all of them. They're not all doing it. But they definitely took advantage of the fact that what really caused inflation, I'll explain it right now. When the pandemic hit, governments around the world realized that if they didn't give money to people who couldn't work because of the pandemic, their economies would collapse. And that would cause something close to what we had in the Great Depression, where once one economy collapsed or once one sector of an economy collapsed, it would domino effect. And you'd have it all over the world. And you'd have entire sectors literally collapse, maybe not even come back, like permanent damage to economies. So they said, we're going to put money into the system. We're going to keep people so they can continue to buy food, so they can continue to pay their rent, so they won't be evicted. They can pay their mortgage, all of that. That didn't just happen in the United States. That happened all over the world. The second thing that happens, you did have an infusion of cash, but again, globally, not just the United States. The second thing that you had was the supply chain completely melted down. And when you are making a refrigerator, and that refrigerator is manufactured in the United States, but you need parts from 5 different countries, which this happens. I studied this in grad school. This is exactly what I did articles on. And you need parts from 5 different parts of the world. And you can't get them because the supply chain has collapsed and melted down because of this global pandemic. It's going to take longer to make that refrigerator. You're going to have to spend more money to get those parts. You might have to find a new supplier and pay more money for those parts. So the price of that refrigerator goes up, and that cost gets passed on to consumers. That happened all over the economy all at once. And you saw inflation rise all over the world, not just the United States. And it's actually dropped dramatically in the United States. We're still too high. But it has dropped dramatically all over the world as well. And that's why interest rates are high, because the Fed was trying to basically cool the economy off, slow everything down a bit, cut down on demand, and ease things out so we can get back to normal 2%, which is what we want to do. So anyway, just pointing out that he made absolutely no sense there in that clip, and it's Jesse Watters being Jesse Watters. Now, before I go into the last section, I'm going to do a very quick one for you guys, because I know it's been a while. I don't think I did. I did a little bit of her in the last one. Here we go. I'm Judge Jeanine, and let me tell you, I am sick to death of Christy Nome with her shooting dogs ways. If I had my druthers, if I had an opportunity, I would take my 4 dogs, 3 standard poodles, and we would just go to town. We wouldn't hurt her. We would just humiliate her. Why? How? By throwing things at her and screaming at her and pointing out her bad plastic surgery. Don't talk about mine. I'm perfectly natural. But I'm here to say that, hello, Odin just jumped on my lap. It's time to quit the impression because it scares him. But now I just want to say this very briefly. Odin, you're being a very, very brave cat by jumping on my lap as I'm screaming like Judge Jeanine. So there you go. Whew. She takes it out of me. This is the next section, stories Fox News ignored. Every week I compare the hours I watched on Fox to 5 hours of the PBS NewsHour. The following list are stories that PBS covered that Fox News did not. A Fox News viewer would be less likely to know about negative stories about Trump, anything related to climate change, abortion laws around the country, police brutality, and most international stories. That is every single week. That is why I include this, because it's sort of showing half of propaganda is what you don't report on. Not just what you push, but what you ignore. Because the typical Fox viewer will keep Fox News on all day, and they don't turn the channel, and they don't consume other news. People who consume other news channels are more likely to watch other news, but Fox News viewers will just go straight down that silo, and they never leave the echo chamber. So here we go. Climate disasters. Temperatures in New Delhi, India, where 35 million people live, reached 122 degrees Fahrenheit, leading to heat-related deaths and illnesses. In Mexico, howler monkeys have been dying off in 100-degree heat, and in the U.S., Miami just recorded its hottest May on record. Vermont is the first state to enact a law that would force oil and gas companies to pay a portion of the damage caused by climate change. Updates to the Israel-Hamas war. Benny Gantz, centrist party, proposed a vote to dissolve the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's lack of a plan for post-war Gaza by June 8th. The centrist party does not hold enough seats to bring down the ruling coalition. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also urged the Israeli government to come up with a post-war plan for Gaza that would include a pathway for an independent Palestinian state. The Slovenian government endorsed a motion to recognize an independent Palestinian state. This came days after Ireland, Spain, and Norway recognized a Palestinian state, which was condemned. Police in riot gear broke down tents and removed fencing while they arrested at least 12 pro-Palestinian protesters at Wayne State University. Updates in the war in Ukraine. Spain committed to supplying Ukraine with more air defense missiles to combat Russian glide bombs. Belgium agreed to send 30 F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, while Portugal also agreed to send €126 or $137 million in more military aid. Germany gave Ukraine the green light to hit targets inside of Russia. Norway and Sweden pledged long-term security agreements with Ukraine. More aid and support is likely to come during the NATO summit in July. Russia and Ukraine have each exchanged 75 prisoners of war in the first such swap in 3 months. At the same location, both countries also handed over the bodies of fallen soldiers. Now on to the rest of the news. The UK and EU criticized the decision to convict 14 pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong. China, which authored the 2020 national security law used to prosecute the activists, backed Hong Kong authorities. The U.S. Treasury Department is easing some restrictions on Cuba to help advance free market reforms in the country. The Cuban government legalized small and medium-sized businesses in 2021 after a series of anti-government protests. About one-third of the population is employed in about 11,000 of these businesses. I want to add a quick note here. Out of the 5 communist countries in the world, that is Cuba, China, Laos, Vietnam, and North Korea, 4, those are Cuba, China, Laos, and Vietnam, have some form of free market reforms. The only country that is pure communist, as far as like their textbook communist is concerned, is North Korea. Just wanted to add that. It's just my own personal note there. Taiwan's opposition-controlled legislature passed changes that many Taiwanese say are favorable to China by diminishing the role of the president. After the vote, protests erupted inside the legislature and outside in the streets. The Pope apologized for using a derogatory Italian slur against gay men. Pope Francis used the term while reaffirming his position against their admission to seminaries and priesthood. Reactions are divided over whether the slur was intentional or a linguistic gaffe. He's not a native Italian speaker. PBS produced an extended segment about the growing humanitarian crisis and violence caused by the Sudan's civil war. The conflict has left tens of thousands dead and displaced millions who also faced famine. At least 76 polling sites in 4 counties went offline during the primary election in Texas due to power outages caused by extreme storms. Fox reported on the primaries, left that out. Just want to add that. The legal battle over the ownership of TikTok has been fast-tracked by the Court of Appeals. A lawsuit initiated by a group of TikTok creators against the bill will be heard in September. Giant pandas will return to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. The zoo announced last week that the new agreement had been struck with the Chinese government, and a pair of adult pandas will be delivered to the zoo by the end of the year. Other pandas were returned to China due to diplomatic tensions between the U.S. and China. Nissan issued a recall on 80,000 vehicles over malfunctioning airbags. The company reported that 1 person has died and 85 were injured due to an airbag inflator-related ruptures. The ruling party in South Africa lost its 30-year majority in the last election. The once dominant ANC, or African National Congress Party, won only 40% of the vote in the parliamentary election. The Washington Post published its results of an investigation that looked into widespread physical and sexual abuse of Native American children who were forced to attend boarding schools, most of which were run by the Catholic Church. From 1819 to 1969, tens of thousands of children were sent to more than 500 boarding schools across the country in an effort to destroy Native American culture and seize Native lands. Major League Baseball will add stats from the Negro Leagues to its record books. The Negro Leagues existed due to racism in the sport. Jackie Robinson was the first black player to play for an NBL team in 1947. The GDP in the first quarter of 2024 was adjusted from 1.6% to 1.3% as consumer spending faltered. In a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court of the United States sided with the NRA in a First Amendment case against a New York government regulator who urged companies to distance themselves from the organization after a school shooting in Florida. PBS interviewed Stacey Gilbert, a State Department employee who resigned in protest over the U.S. government policies in Gaza. At least half a dozen officials in the state, defense, education, and interior have also resigned since the war in Gaza began. The Texas Supreme Court rejected a challenge to the state's restrictive abortion law. The court ruled against 20 women who say they were denied medically necessary abortions due to pregnancy complications and other health-related issues. A new study adds to the evidence that girls in America are reaching puberty earlier with potentially troubling implications for their long-term health. More girls are getting their first period sooner than previous generations and experiencing longer periods of menstrual irregularity. PBS produced an extended segment about how ranked choice voting in Alaska has helped more moderate candidates win office. It wasn't too bad this week because everything was that trial. So by the numbers, each week I compare Fox News, the top 5 topics on Fox, to the top 5 topics on PBS. And let's start with Fox. 40% Trump guilty. That's after we all found out he was guilty. 40% of their programming. That's a lot. 16% was dedicated to just shilling for Trump. So Trump 2024. 15% was dedicated to the trial. 7% was dedicated to Biden bashing. And 2%, can't make this one up, was dedicated to fan mail. So, you're learning a lot. You're learning a lot if you're watching Fox. I'm being very sarcastic with that. Learning a lot about the news. PBS NewsHour, 16% Trump guilty, 11% Israel-Hamas war, 5% Trump hush money trial, 5% that piece about ranked choice voting in Alaska, which was very good, highly recommend. You can check it out on YouTube, and 4% for the abuse in Native American boarding schools. And that is a brand new story that just broke. So words used on Fox News for the week ending June 2nd, 2024. Trump, get this, a staggering 1,091 times. Biden, 476. The word guilty, 129. Border, 120. China, 75. Economy, 53. Inflation, 43. Hillary, 41. Hunter, 39. Gag order, 28. Israel, only 27 times. Conflicted, 14. Banana Republic, 14. No crime, because it's a phrase Trump kept saying, 12. Third world, 9. And one of the rare times, AOC, 0. Again, I always do this when she's 0. Because she never is 0. Now I've annoyed my neighbors and my cats. I was a soprano. Most women are. So lyric soprano, kind of run-of-the-mill, kind of boring. Anyway, that's the podcast. If you'd like to see more for Decoding Fox News, you should go to my Substack for Decoding Fox News and become a paid subscriber if you want. You can go to my Patreon and become a paid supporter if you want. You can also check out my work on Twitter, also known as X, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook. For Facebook, it's my Facebook fan page. Also for YouTube, it's under my name, Juliet Jeske. And thank you so much for listening. I'm completely exhausted. I want to sleep for like 3 days. The cats, Odin and Thor, also send their love, and I will see you at the next podcast. Also, you can check out a version of this podcast at the Resolute Square YouTube channel. I will see you at the next podcast.
Thank you all for coming to my one-woman show. Resolute Square.